Greetings, and welcome to Beatles Stuffology, where two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is McQuarrie. That doesn't tend to change from week to week, and I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. That doesn't tend to change week to week either. Say hello, Andrew.
Well, hello. Hello. How are you doing since we last saw each other?
Well, I find myself unchanged since we last saw each other. How are you doing since we last saw each other?
I'm feeling peppy and jaunty, actually.
Fuck you.
Which for those who actually have listened to the previous episode will sort of understand why that comes up. Anyway, yeah. So we've got one of those songs today that I would regard as being, a biggie and a really important song, but for lots and lots and lots of different reasons. One of those songs that, the terminology of music has kind of changed a lot recently. Now people talk about dropping. Everything gets dropped and you have deep cuts. Whereas before we just had like good album tracks. Well, this is a really, really good album track, and yet also at the same time a really bad one. That was my best Partridge impression. Okay, over to you, big guy.
Okay, you're bigger than I am. Right, yes, good. So, you can't do that. Oh dear. Where to begin with this one? Let's begin. Let's just try and begin on a positive note. I think musically, this is an absolute cracker. I think musically,
and can we begin at the beginning?
Absolutely phenomenal song.
I mean, musically, you're right, but I think actually you said where to begin. Let's begin at the beginning. I mean, this is a phenomenal introduction, and for those of you with memories that go back 2 weeks, you'd have heard yet another of the episodes where we talk about the fact that the Beatles opened with the key refrain or chorus. But actually, no, we get something even better here. We get that guitar work by George that just leads us in beautifully to the really kind of bluesy rhythm. It's phenomenal.
It is. It's a lovely little guitar phrase, and it's just one of those things which seems so effortlessly done that it kind of almost takes your breath away. It's fantastic, and it's got that lovely jangle to it. It's just a great way into the song. Ringo then follows that up with some really great work as well. It's a great song for Ringo, this. And it's just musically really together. In the last episode, one of the things I was talking about was the fact that a lot of the songs on this album are a little bit samey because Lennon wrote a lot of them, and a lot of them follows a relatively similar pattern. One of the things I mentioned is with When I Get Home, is that it's based around sevenths, and so is this song. It's G7th, C7th, D7th. It's almost exactly the same chords, and yet everything is better about this song. And again, that's not particularly to slag off When I Get Home, but it's just so well put together. And this is a song where you feel the band are really making an effort musically here. It's tight, it's really well put together. You mentioned that lead guitar solo, which is a unusual Lennon lead guitar solo, which is great. It just all hangs together incredibly well musically. It's a very, very good musical song.
Yeah, so let's maybe sort of delve into a few bits on that and see what links we can make to others. Obviously, as When I Get Home's fresh in our mind, we talked about the kind of the repetition of that whoa whoa I, and that on the fifth time it's saying rock really guys again. But actually, when the Beatles are on top form, that element of repetition works really well. So, for example, the intro is also the end of the song as well. It's almost as though they've sort of heard something in the way that that's played, the way that it starts the song. You think, well, actually, do you know what? That would also work at the end, and then you've kind of bookended everything else within it really well. And once you get to the end, you're then reminded of how it started, and you're kind of reminded of that big impact that the opening had. So that's a really, really clever thing to do. It's also very simply but cleverly put together. And it's the old pop thing. Well, now it's the old pop thing. Of course, then it was probably the new pop thing. For the first run through of the the verses. I mean, there isn't really a chorus, is there, as such?
No, there's no
It's
chorus
just that the verse sort of ends with you can't do that. But it's the first run through. It's just John singing, and it's on the second run through that we get the backing vocals coming in. So you have, as the Beatles were doing on the Please Please Me album as well, they're layering their songs with sophistication as they go through and adding and building almost to the point of that sort of little crescendo. You're giving the audience more and more and more as you go through until you get to that guitar solo, when suddenly it's not just the guitar solo, it's the vocals of "You Can't Do That" over the top, as though, okay, so I didn't realize it was John playing the guitar, so fair enough. Almost as though that maybe that is implying that the guitar solo is standing in for John singing, and they're still singing the backing vocals in the background. I mean, that's incredibly well constructed, well thought out. I mean, today we would regard that as like, almost classic structuring. But bear in mind, this is, early 1964. And this was one of the first songs they recorded for the album as well. It's stunningly well done. However simple it may be to us now, it's simple in its complexity.
Well, quite. And obvious doff of the hat to one Mr. George Martin as well for the way that it's produced. It's another song which really benefits from the lightness of his touch, and everything comes across clearly, whether it's that absolutely great guitar solo, Ringo's cowbell. I mean, again, love a cowbell, can't go wrong there. It's just all put together. Actually, it's not Ringo that plays cowbell in this. Sorry, it's Paul McCartney that plays cowbell in this. I do apologise. I wouldn't want to be factually inaccurate on a podcast. That'd be terrible.
Well, that's according
that's
according to Ian MacDonald.
That's according to Ian MacDonald. And, I mean, am I going to contradict him? No, let's just assume that he's probably right and quietly move on. There's a cowbell. It's great. It really adds something to this song. So I'm happy with that. And, it's so well put together. And, all those climaxes that you were talking about, that's really an important part of the structure, but also that slide up the note on the word green. Everybody's green, and it gives you that little peak, that little push back up that you can count. Just small details. It didn't need to be sung that way, but it shows the extra effort that's being put in. It could have just been everybody's green. That works fine. It doesn't necessarily come across as any worse, but it's just that extra little push which is being given to the song that adds all those little details, all those little finicky bits, all the little crinkly bits around the edge. It just makes all the difference in the world to the song.
Yeah, and even in that, I was going to call it a middle eight, but it occurs twice in the song. Can you have a middle eight, or maybe there's a 1/3 and a 2/3 eight? Anyway,
let's call it the bridge.
The bridge. Take me. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Even that builds to a really suitable climax before then cutting straight back into the verse as well. So it's just a song of really well thought out climaxes, impressively done. And referring to MacDonald, your mention of cowbell, just a quick look down, of course it says start on drums and conga, and you know what, I've just got a line of middle-aged white office workers at a Christmas party dancing their way through the studio with Ringo at the front. I know that's not the case, but please let me have my imagery. It sort of
I think that's an image worth preserving.
And let's face it, of all the Beatles who are most likely to lead a conga line, it's Ringo, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Ringo would be the head of the conga. George would be a little bit embarrassed at the back. Paul would be in the middle giving it loudly, and John would be slouching against the wall, not wanting to get involved. That's my Beatles conga lineup.
Be involved, but also really annoyed that Cynthia's in the middle and that the good-looking guy from the Counts has got his hands on her backside. I'm not saying that that's anything linked to anything that's going on, but in fairness to him, MacDonald is, in my opinion, absolutely right when he says, as a performance, it's among the best from this period. And even refers to the most exciting backing vocal arrangements and the tightening tension of the guitar solo. And he's absolutely spot on. But it's not just him who's got this down to a T. And I thought this was quite an interesting one as well. I've been reading a lot, even though it's only tangentially Beatles related. Bob Stanley's book Yeah Yeah Yeah, Story of Modern Pop, and actually, he refers to this having a serrated sound, which I absolutely agree with. In terms of the count, what I'll do is I'll just read this short passage because there's quite a bit for us to pick out. It says, the relentless cowbell and vicious guitar break make for an enjoyably sadistic experience that again looks towards the bristling aggression of the Kinks' opening brace of hits, You Really Got Me, All Day and All of the Night, later in the year. And then it does go on to compare it to this aggression that Lennon has to rock hard, linking it to things like Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except for Me and My Monkey, or sounds spiteful, Run for Your Life. But later he turned it on himself with the Blues, Cold Turkey. The flip side of this nasty streak, and remember this is where we're sort of heading into lyrical territory, we might not go there quite yet, was the reflective apology, Jealous Guy. Either way, he says, the listener wins. And I kind of got to agree with him there. It really stands out because of it. But in particular, what I like is and I hadn't really made this connection before, but just about how much this does foreshadow those opening Kinks hits. Now, I know that Ray Davies would almost certainly deny there's any connection whatsoever. Famously a man who wasn't necessarily a massive fan of some of the Beatles' best work. But you can see that there's a connection there. You could see that there's an energy and a cutting edge to it that also then shines through in All Day and All of the Night and You Really Got Me. So, I'm pleased that I delved into Bob Stanley's book there. It just sort of makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things which, we will definitely bump up against this again when we get to Run for Your Life. But it is one of the things which makes the discussion around this song slightly difficult because the music is so good. And I think this is true of Run for Your Life as well. There's kind of an internal desire to kind of not forgive the lyric for what it is or for what it's trying to say, but just to kind of, I don't know, not skate over it. That's not right either. But there's there's a pleasure to this song which comes from the fact that the music is so good and so powerful, so well put together, that when you get to the kind of the difficulties of the lyric, you kind of want to just sort of say, well, it's just lyrics. Like the last song we were talking about, we were saying, it's just stock phrases, lyric doesn't really matter, but the music was kind of a bit, samey. This is kind of the flip side where the music is really, really something, and maybe the song would be better if it was just a collection of stock phrases, because we're going to have to talk about the content of the lyrics shortly, but there is a kind of, I don't know, there is a kind of pleasure to it as well, however objectionable you think they are or however difficult they are to sort of modern sensibilities. The performances, and I include Lennon's vocal in this because I think it's a really great vocal performance from Lennon as well. It's hard not to get sort of taken along with it, and that's one of the reasons that this song can be a difficult one to discuss.
So to make a leap into the realm of American politics, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas is apparently close friends with a very, very rich, influential right-winger who is known to own several paintings by Adolf Hitler. Now, there are very few reasons to want to own a painting by Adolf Hitler, but even if you were to attempt to put on one side the everything else about him, if there wasn't that, I don't want to say notoriety understands. If he wasn't the bastard that he clearly was, no one would be interested in his paintings at all, because there's not great technique in there. You can read about the fact that compared to a lot of other people at the time, the reason why he wasn't a famous artist was because really he wasn't as good as all the people who were famous. Simplification, I know. So there's clearly another reason why someone is interested in that. However, and yes, I'm about to compare Woody Allen to Hitler. I know, it's odd. Just roll with it and don't put this in the opening blurb for this episode, please, if you don't mind. The opening 5 minutes or so of Manhattan is absolutely stunning, spectacular cinema, and I would watch that. I mean, there's a lot that's wrong with Manhattan in terms of older man, younger woman creepiness, but that opening is just absolutely fantastic. And there were times when clearly Woody Allen was funny, no doubting that. I mean, some lines from Annie Hall come to mind as being some of the funniest things I've ever heard. Clever, but also beautiful as well. So you kind of get into that dilemma, don't you? So, well, knowing what I know, do I now go back and watch those films again if the opportunity arises? And, would you enjoy it in the same way? So we do need to think about that lyrical sense and whether or not it represents something that spoils the rest of the work. I think it does affect the way you think about it. I don't think you can blindly go into this song and just ignore the lyrics, but you can be conscious of them and maybe hopefully find them abhorrent, but also understand that there's something about the emotion in the song that still makes it work, and the song itself is a brilliant construction. So we can talk about the lyrics. We can also acknowledge that the words don't indicate the feelings or always indicate the feelings of the people that write it. Maybe it did in this case, in which case the third part of that is that people change. But then on the contrast, we also have to accept that casual talk can create difficulties for others. And certainly social conditions at the time were still such. I'm going to talk about 1964 in a very simplistic fashion, where old values were still very much in force. And it's interesting then when you sort of delve back into the Craig Brown book, and the Craig Brown highlights a few establishment figures who clearly disliked the Beatles because of the way in which they were changing society. And yet actually what you've got here are values being expressed that uphold some of those old notions of society, of, I'll delve into some specifics in the lyrics in a moment. And it kind of reminds you that we're a long way from 1966 and all that. And of course, we're a long way from that element of the sexual revolution. We're a long way from legalized abortion. We're a long way from, well, a short way, but I suppose in terms of time, it's a long way morally and emotionally from the right to birth control. We're also a long way still, about 10, 12 years from specific legislation on domestic abuse, as opposed to just using other acts that might refer to abuse in many kinds. And I was reminded of that because we were watching the ITV drama on Raoul Moat that's been on over here in the UK. I say that because I know we've got a significant percentage of American listeners, and Raoul Moat is, I don't know how to describe it, but basically he was a killer, killed a policeman, a convicted criminal anyway, and anyway, all sorts of horribleness going on there. And as you do sometimes at the end of the final episode of the drama, it refers to the fact that in England and Wales, every week on average there are still 2 women who are killed by their partners. And whilst I'm not saying in any way, shape or form that John Lennon contributes to that in any way at all, but you could also argue that he was soaking up the norms of the time and reinforcing the norms of the time. And however vociferous he may have been later on, that he had changed, we still have to reflect on the fact that this is an issue that is painful for an awful lot of people. So yes, me in my white male middle-aged middle class world can look at it and go, what a brilliant song, it's fantastic, by the way the lyrics are a bit dodgy. There will be an awful lot of people who I think justifiably will say, I don't think you should listen to this because of what the lyrics represent. It's a difficult argument, and I realise I've made you sort of sit there and listen to that for a few minutes. But I think it's worth saying that other views are available, and that perhaps sometimes you kind of have to listen to it through other people's perspectives as well.
Well, absolutely, and I mean, I do think the sociological aspect of this is important. I mean, so much of what surrounded that is what we would now probably refer to as something like toxic masculinity, but that idea of the man being in charge, of being very dominant, of being able to treat women in this kind of way, it was part of the culture in the early 60s. And it's something that Lennon himself admitted that he fed into. He didn't really question it. It wasn't something that he really understood, and it was only in later life that he came to sort of reflect and understand. I mean, I don't know specifically how many times he may have indulged in domestic violence with Cynthia, but there was definitely one time where he thumped her, and that does also color how you view this. If it happened once, it would be surprising if that never happened again, but at the same time, maybe that was a trigger to stop. I don't want to go too far down that line because I haven't really done enough research on that side to be able to go much further. But the fact is that he would these days be referred to as somebody who indulged in domestic abuse. So when you read that alongside these lyrics, it is important to bear that in mind. And again, it is the problematic aspect of this song, because if this was just a bad song which had really bad lyrics to it, really objectionable lyrics, then it would be easy to dismiss. Part of the problem, and again, Run for Your Life is hovering in the horizon there, but part of the problem is this isn't a bad song. It's an extremely well constructed song, and so you therefore have to, you have to factor that in when you're discussing it. And it's not even a question of separating the art from the artist, although there is an element of that as well. But it is one of the problems when it comes to dealing with a piece of art which is still genuinely good but which has objectionable content in it, and there isn't an easy way to square that circle. The last thing that we should be doing is ignoring it or glossing over it. But any kind, all everything, context is everything, and that doesn't excuse or forgive it, but it does offer an insight and understanding into it, and helps to describe why it is what it is, and also why it's entirely unacceptable. It's interesting that this song went on to be quite a live staple as well. It gets churned out a lot and it enters the live sets very quickly, and nobody seems to pause for breath. And from a musical perspective, I think that's incredibly easy to understand. It's a frenetic song. It's full of energy. The call and response backing vocals are really, really good as well. Like, it's a fun song to listen to. Like you mentioned that the George Harrison introductory riff, which Lennon will basically just steal for Ticket to Ride. It's that good. I think it kind of works again, so it's great. There's so much about this song which is positive. So it's understandable why it entered the live set, why it was being played all the time, why people were fond of it. Nobody seems to have stopped and thought about what it was actually about. Now, whether that's simply because, it's just a dumb pop song, we don't look at this in 1964, or whether it simply never occurred to anyone, whether it was, never mind, I don't know. And there isn't ever going to be a definite answer to that. But context is incredibly important when going over this.
The other another relevant recent example was the Welsh Rugby Football Union saying that before their home games in Cardiff, they would no longer play a song that is sung widely by Welsh rugby fans, which is Green Green Grass of Home, which is actually about a killer and I think a wife murderer. Oh, that's a bad expression. Anyway, and of course there was uproar because, oh, you can't take this away from us. We've been singing it for so long, so on and so forth. And you think, well, no one's stopping you from singing it. All they're saying is they're not going to play it anymore. You can still sing it. And so we are kind of immersed in these discussions at the moment about the validity of things like this. And you think maybe
wasn't Delilah also?
Delilah,
were they not going to
Thank
stop singing
well
Delilah at one point as well?
I knew as I said it was the wrong one, but I thought, okay, right, fine. I'll just sort of say it quietly enough in the hope that no one would hear it, or that we could maybe drop in the correct one at a later stage. You are right, it is Delilah. I got my Tom Jones mixed up there. But
Fair enough.
Also then discussions about whether or not it's okay to go back and to change some of the words in Roald Dahl books from things that were particularly offensive. And I think I'm correct in saying he did change some himself. I think originally the Oompa Loompas were called something which was much more vile and disgusting. So these debates have been around for a while. But with specific reference to the words and not necessarily attributing them to Lennon, I despite the fact that we talk regularly on this Beatles podcast, it doesn't mean I go away and I read up about Lennon. Some biographies you can read, you just wonder exactly how much truth there is in them. However, I'm going to refer to Simon Armitage poem. Simon Armitage is our current poet laureate over here, and quite a while ago he wrote a poem called Poem, and it's actually written in sonnet form, and this is it's 3 quatrains and then a couplet, and the second of the quatrains goes, and every week he tipped up half his wage, and what he didn't spend each week he saved. Good guy. And praised his wife for every meal she made, and once, for laughing, punched her in the face. And the couplet at the end says, here's how they rated him when they look back. Sometimes he did this, sometimes he did that. Now, Armitage isn't trying to lessen the impact of either the good things or the bad things. He's effectively saying to us, well, make your own mind up. Do all of those good things, balance, outweigh, make up for in any way, shape or form the vile things that he does. And all 3 of the quatrains are the same. You have 3 lines where he's doing nice, normal, everyday things. And then the last line is something, absolutely awful, like stealing from his mum, for example. Although it's only a small amount. Does that make a difference? And then you get into some of the language you can't do that. And I think it is worth spending a bit of time looking at some of the choices that have been made, because I think they are significant, because they are much more pointed than the things. I mean, I'll Cry Instead has some lyrics that are questionable, but these are, quite pointed. I'll pick out a few examples. Like, I've got something to say that might cause you pain. Well, John, do you need to say it? You're actually saying, I'm going to hurt you with this, okay? If I catch you talking to that boy again and you think, oh no, she must have been doing this a lot to rile poor old John, okay, I'm going to let you down and leave you flat. Now, is that clever play on words? Or leave you flat? Is that flat as in sad, depressed, or is that flat as in laid out on your back on the floor? Don't know. As Simon Armitage might say, sometimes he did this, sometimes he did that. Because I told you, you can't do that. And you think, well, they've talked about it before. So, it's reasonable then at this point maybe that John has brought it up. Because if they've discussed it before, maybe he's sort of pointed out the fact that actually it makes me uncomfortable. But he says, well, it's the second time I've caught you talking to him. The second? What? So, what? This has happened twice. And now we're talking about, jealousy. We're talking about leaving you flat. And And even then, in terms of, everybody's green, let's assume that that's a reference to Othello. We'll see. Because I'm the one who won your love. And that expression, things like won your love, is something that you'd still find in a lot of pop music further down the line. The fact that it's a competition, it's a battle, it's a one-sided thing where you wear someone down rather than actually you you have something that's perhaps a little bit more collaborative. He says, I can't help my feelings, I'll go out of my mind. Okay, but how is that the woman's problem? There's so much in there. He's worried about people laughing in his face rather than actually worrying about treating someone in a way that is human. But you just know that there'll be some people who will also use this in the oh god, do I want to mention his name? In the Andrew Tate sense, who will no doubt say, well, she had what was coming to her, because, oh, look what she was doing. She was going against the natural order of things, and so on and so forth. These are things that are still around today, and I think we have to sort of think about both sides of it, at the risk of potentially losing audience. But yeah, we should praise the Beatles for the amazing things that they did, but at the same time we should also say, actually, I'm a little uncomfortable with this, and if this song ever came on the radio and I was with someone, maybe I would think about saying something. I don't know. It's a funny one like that. But I think it is worth us just being absolutely clear that this is a paranoid arsehole who's singing this song. Now, that's not necessarily John.
I think it is, but well, okay, carry on.
Fair enough. But I think then there is a decision to be made by some people as to whether then this is a song that some people might still want to listen to, however strong the rest of it is. Do the lyrics completely outweigh thing? Now, I personally don't believe that it means you should then altogether disregard everything that he's ever done, because that would be a calamity, on the sense of who wouldn't want to listen to all of those great 1970s albums, those classic John Lennon tracks like Mother, that everyone loves so much, and all of those ones that no one actually listens to on his various rather self-indulgent albums. Sorry, John fans, get over it. You might want to edit that one out, JG. That might have been a bit too ranty. Anyway, carry on.
No, too late now.
For all the amazing things that there is in the John Lennon back catalogue, I think obviously this and Run for Your Life, I think that they should make Beatles fans squirm a little bit. They should make them wrestle with that dilemma of what they think about it going forward. Okay, right, I've gone for a long time now, and you've been very, very patient while I've been doing my various bits of analysis. I'm going to shut up for a bit and let you jump in. Thank you. I
don't. Thank you for the praise. I don't. I don't really disagree with anything you said, so I don't have a lot to kind of expand beyond that, other than the sort of fairly self-evident statement that it's okay to acknowledge when people that you admire fall short of what it is you admire them for. That's okay, and it's important to be able to confront those things without the desire to shy away from them. I completely agree when you said that this should make Beatles fans uncomfortable. It should make them squirm, and yeah, absolutely. And if it makes people think about what lies behind this song and its relevance, then that's probably a good thing. But it's not it's not one that we should simply try and gloss over. And it's easy to be fulsome in praise with the music, but that shouldn't in any way be an excuse to gloss over the lyrical content. What I find interesting is comparing this version to the version which is on Anthology, and the Anthology version is not massively different from the version which is on the album. What it is it's a little bit rougher and readier. It's a little bit more sort of chaotic. It's not quite as tight as the album version, and I think that has a very curious effect in the song as well, because the album version is really pointed. And that some of that is that's where a lot of the nastiness comes from. I mean it's a vicious lyric, of course it is, and like you said, it's clearly being sung by a paranoid arsehole. Now, whether you want to say that's Lennon or not, I think it probably is at this point. But anyway, that's fine. But there's a deliberateness that the clean studio version has, which really puts an emphasis on the nastier elements of the song, whereas the slightly more rough and ready version, which is on Anthology, it doesn't forgive the lyric in any way, because you couldn't do that with a song like this. But it's less unpleasant. The slightly more ramshackle approach to the Anthology version, it blunts it slightly. It's that it doesn't feel as pointed, as vicious, as deliberate as the studio version does, or as the album version does, I should say. And that's kind of an interesting effect to have on a version of the song which is ostensibly the less good one. After all, that's why it's on Anthology and not on the album. But yeah, it definitely makes a difference to the emphasis of the song.
So can I just check? Anthology, is that just a different take from the studio recording?
Yeah, it's just a different. It's an earlier take from the studio recording.
So you say it's rougher, and significantly, would we notice massive differences?
That's the thing. It's not massively different, but it's different enough. So Lennon's vocal is a little less tight. He's not following the melody quite as well as he does on the album version, as well as technically competent as he does on the album version. It's a slightly different guitar solo, which is maybe a little less polished, a little less clean. It's not played in a technical sense. It's not played quite as well. So it's a little bit more shonky. So it's little things like that. It's not a big difference, but it's a big difference.
Okay, fair enough. I like your way of putting that. Yeah, and were there any, because on a Things We Said Today episode, we talked about the BBC recording, which was a lot slower than some of their live versions. Now, I seem to remember having watched some dodgy YouTube clips of live versions of this, that it's even faster and more raucous than the studio one. Were there any BBC recordings?
Yeah, so it's on live at the BBC, which is a pretty decent run through, and it's also a bonus track on the Live at the Hollywood Bowl album as well. That's a pretty fast version. The BBC version is pretty similar to the studio version. There's not an awful lot in it other than a really, really bad voiceover from somebody who clearly has no interest in what they're listening to at all at the start of the track. But it's not. It's comparable. Let's say it that way.
Okay. I haven't. I've been remiss recently on cover versions. I think you've been a bit stronger on covers. I've got one that I'll mention. But I think before we were recording, you mentioned there was a Supremes cover that you quite liked.
Yeah, there's a Supreme version which dates from 1964. It's on an album called A Bit of Liverpool. Confusingly, there's a song on it called Because, but it's not that Because. It's a different Because. But anyway, it's. I think it's one of those things where, again, you see the origin of the song much more clearly when you hear someone else recording it. There's a slight change in the lyric as well. The second verse starts, so it's the second time I've caught you talking to her. It's the second time I caught you being a flirt.
Right.
Which is kind of interesting, which makes sense because it's being sung by women. So of course the second time you're talking to him wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
So it's rhyming her and fleur.
However, talking is quite emotionally neutral, whereas at least you can sort of maybe sort of say, well, okay, well, what could this person be doing that might cause some frustration, at least.
Well, absolutely. But it's interesting to hear it sung in a style which presumably was actually an influence on the musical side of things in the first place. So it does have that kind of New York black girl group kind of vibe to it musically, the Beatles version. So to actually hear like the Supremes do a recording of it is interesting. And again, it's a little bit slower. It's in that kind of classic sort of Supreme style, and the viciousness and the nastiness of the lyric kind of isn't there in that version. It's a much softer lyric when it's being sung by a woman rather than by a you know very aggressive kind of lead vocal by a man, and it fits in with that kind of that sort of girl group tradition of songs where, oh, you know, somebody, my man's been cheating on me, or you know, will you still be there for me, or you know, all that kind of stuff.
Will you
It
still love me
feels
tonight?
like it. I'm trying to avoid the word vernacular here, but it
Oh
feels like
yeah.
it fits into that vernacular very well, and in a way, kind of better than the Beatles version fits into the Beatles vernacular. It's a really, really interesting cover version. I strongly recommend that people listen to it.
Okay. Any others that you've got?
Well, we have to kind of talk about. Well, we don't have to, but I'm going to. I'm not contractually obligated to. But anyway, the kind of the Harry Nilsson version, which dates from 60. Oh God, I was going to say 1967. I better check my facts because again, I wouldn't want to be wrong on a podcast. It is 67. Well done, me. And it's kind of interesting because it's what's now, I mean, you would call it a mashup now. It's got a whole bunch of other lyrics and melodies from other Beatles songs, well, up till 1967 anyway, kind of dropped into it. Other than the very last line, which is cheesy and corny beyond words, it's actually kind of interesting as well. It's a bit. Okay, this is a slight overreach, but I'm going to reach over it anyway. It's a bit, you know, the Cirque du Soleil Love album, where little bits get dropped in here and there, even though you have kind of like the main bulk of the song. It's kind of a little bit of a progenitor of that. It's in a similar vein. It's very short. It's like, I think, 2.5 minutes long or something like that. It's not any longer than the original. But it's just interesting to hear somebody do that in 1967. It's really, I was going to say progressive. I'm not sure if that's quite the right adjective, but it's just really interesting to hear somebody kind of trying to pull that off, and it not just being like an awful kind of Jive Bunny Stars on 45 atrocity. You know, it's like somebody who seems to have really put a bit of thought into it. It's again, it's not perfect by any means, but it's a really interesting listen.
Okay. And of course, big links with in the 70s at least with Ringo and John.
Well, yes.
Um, so yeah, okay, fair enough. Well, actually, the one that I've got for you, not as high profile as those, also has links to the Beatles in the 70s, because and this I wouldn't say it didn't blow my mind, but this amused me no end. That some point before he died, Henry McCullough and Danny Sywell produced an album called Shabby Road, in which these two founding members, alongside Paul McCartney of Wings, produced a tribute album to the Beatles, which just is the oddest thing you can possibly think of. It's just so utterly bizarre, because it must have been really difficult for them joining a band with Paul McCartney, because up till that point, you know, his solo albums had been very much solo albums. So to then sort of say, well, actually, now I want to be in a band, and I want to be in a band with you know these guys, must have been incredibly intimidating. And for them to, I mean, they didn't necessarily last more than a few years in Wings, because Wings, of course, had that sort of continual, you know, revolution in terms of members, composition. But for them to kind of come out the other side and then to have decided some 25, 30 years later that what they were going to do was produce an album not of Wings songs but of Beatles songs, I think is incredibly interesting. Maybe, of course, it was just an opportunity to try and make some money. You never know. But anyway, their version is very slow. Certainly, the live version that I've seen of it is much more in that old kind of slow down blues tempo, which really works for the verse. It doesn't work for the bridge, which needs to be a little bit more uplifting. I don't think it quite works at that kind of tempo. But yeah, it's a curiosity, shall we say, that so many people who had a connection with the Beatles in one way, shape, or form have ended up recording lots of Beatles tracks, and that they, I'm not sure when it was, maybe it was, say mid 2000s, and someone can come along and correct us. They chose to put that song on it as well.
That's really interesting. I haven't heard of that before. Where did you find that, out of curiosity?
Well, not necessarily in any great internet search, but basically you just need to keep scrolling down the list on secondhand songs if that's what you use, and you'll find a reference to Henry McCullough's blues band, but actually it's the thing you want to look for is the McCullough and Sywell's Shabby Road album, and you should be able to find some live tracks from that. Because the things like Act Naturally, Can't Buy Me Love, Come Together, From Me to You, Here Comes the Sun, I Saw Her Standing There, Let Me Be, Norwegian Wood, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, and then oddly, Why Don't We Do It in the Road, and You Can't Do That.
That's a brave choice of songs there. That's quite the clutch.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. But also I think interesting, and yes, I am making the transition now. Interesting in terms of the discussions and debates we had about how you score this. Now, on the last episode, I teased you a bit because you were umming and ahhing about quite a basic, straightforward song. I'm going to enjoy seeing you tie yourself up in knots about how you score this one.
Yes, well, oh God, yeah. I'm going to have so many knots in this one. I think I'm going to have a scout round to try and undo them all. It's good grief. I don't know. This might be the hardest song we've had to score so far.
Which does make a mockery of musically of the whole system, really, doesn't it? So
oh yeah, but that's also what makes it such fun. So, well, all right. Maybe we'll divide and conquer. So let's say that the music here is really good. I think we can agree on that.
Not having that. One score.
No. Let me finish.
Okay.
The music's really good. So I would, if I was purely scoring it on the music, I think I would probably give it about an 8.5. However, the lyric is appalling, so obviously that's going to pull it down. So it's looking at the two bits separately. I think I'm gonna. Oh God. 5. I'm gonna give it 5. There. All right, your turn.
Okay. No, I think you've done something very sensible. Yeah, there is a dilemma.
How dare you? You take that back.
There is a dilemma in this because you don't want to give the wrong impression. I'm going to be a little bit more generous than you, mostly because throughout a lot of the episodes we've had so far, I've actually talked about the fact that I don't pay a huge amount of attention to the lyrics, and it's kind of like the emotion that's significant. And I don't remember connecting this when I first heard it in the way that I would connect it now. So I'm going to score it on the basis of someone, perhaps hearing it at the time and the emotion that they would have had. And I think at that point, you do have to say it's up there with the best of what they've got to offer up to this point. So I'm going to balance you out and say that despite the evilness and the vicious of the lyrics, I'm not going to rate it as though it's an Adolf Hitler painting. I'm going to rate it as though it's a Woody Allen classic and say it's an 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10. Wow. That's a big swing. That might be one of the
You
biggest
could argue that
biggest
what I'm trying to
disparities
do
we've had.
is to encourage interaction from our listenership out there as well. So if you want to tell me that I'm an ignorant so and so, then feel free to contact us. My
Yes,
email
because
address is whatever JG is suggesting is his email address at the moment.
yes. Well, I mean, if you would care to question Andrew's extremely high mark, or indeed my extremely low mark, then you can really get a hold of us. We are contactable by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We are on Twitter, of course. We are Beatles_ology. And you can find more of my writing on my blog at www.jgmcquarrie.scot. And you can also read some of Andrew's writing at www.stuffology.co.uk.
Which
Please also
reminds me,
check out my
I
other
haven't actually put
podcast.
anything on for a couple of weeks, so I need to get something on now.
Excellent. Please do so.
Yes.
Yeah. Please also check out my other podcast, which is Talking Trek to You, where a noob and an expert go through the original Star Trek series episode by episode. Please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcatcher you're using, so that more people can find the show. Next episode, we will be finishing with the album. So that means it's almost time for us to move on to the movie. But before we do, we have to cover I'll Be Back. So that's what we're going to be doing next time. And as always, we hope you're going to join us for it. But until then, keep listening.